The certified letter from Riverside County's zoning department arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew exactly who had sent them after me before I even opened it. I stood in my driveway in Corona, California, holding that envelope like it was radioactive. My name is Quincy Yates, and for the past 8 years, I had been running a small custom furniture workshop out of the detached garage on my 2-acre property. Never had a single complaint until 6 months ago when Helen Orwell moved into the Sunset Ridge HOA development that bordered my land. The letter stated I was operating a commercial business in a residentially zoned area and had 30 days to cease operations or face daily fines of $500. My hands shook as I read it. This workshop was not just my hobby. It was how I made my living after getting laid off from the aerospace industry 3 years back. I had built a solid client base, employed 2 part-time assistants, and finally felt like I was getting somewhere. I walked back toward my workshop, a converted 3-car garage that sat at the back of my property, far from my actual house. The sound of the belt sander greeted me as I opened the door. My assistant, Marcus, was smoothing down a walnut table we were building for a client in Newport Beach. "Everything okay, boss?" Marcus asked, pushing his safety goggles up onto his forehead. "We might have a problem," I said, tossing the letter onto my workbench. Marcus read it and whistled low. "Can they actually do this? If the zoning is residential only, yeah, they can." I ran my hand through my hair, feeling the weight of it all. I need to make some calls. The thing was, I had checked the zoning before I started my business. My property was in an unincorporated area of Riverside County, and the rules had always been looser out here. That was the whole point of living outside city limits. But apparently, someone had made a complaint, and now the county had to investigate. I did not need 3 guesses to figure out who that someone was. Helen Orwell had introduced herself the week she moved in, walking right up to my property line with a clipboard and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She was maybe 55, with that particular haircut that suburban women of a certain type seemed to favor, short and asymmetrical, asking to speak to managers everywhere she went. "I'm the new HOA president for Sunset Ridge," she had announced like she was declaring herself queen. "I wanted to introduce myself to the neighbors and make sure everyone is aware of our community standards." "I'm not in your HOA," I had replied, confused. "My property is separate." "Well, yes, but you border our community, and we have certain expectations about the character of the neighborhood." Her eyes had drifted to my workshop where I had some lumber stacked outside. "Is that a business you are running?" "I do custom woodworking, yeah." Her smile had tightened. "I see. Well, I am sure we will be seeing more of each other." That had been 6 months ago, and true to her word, I had seen plenty of Helen Orwell. She complained about the noise, even though I only ran equipment between 9 in the morning and 5 in the evening. She complained about the delivery trucks that came to drop off materials, even though they used the county road, not her HOA streets. She complained about the appearance of my property, even though I kept everything neat and my actual house was well maintained. I had ignored most of it, figuring she would eventually get tired and move on to torturing someone else. Clearly, I had underestimated her. The next morning, I drove to the Riverside County Planning Department in the city of Riverside. The clerk at the counter was a tired-looking woman named Sandra who pulled up my property information on her computer. "Yeah, your parcel is zoned RR, rural residential," she said, squinting at the screen. "Commercial operations require a conditional use permit at minimum, or the property needs to be in an area zoned for light industrial or commercial use." "I have been doing this for 8 years, I protested. "Nobody ever said anything." Sandra shrugged. We are complaint-driven. If nobody complains, we do not go looking for violations. But once a complaint is filed, we have to investigate and enforce the code. What are my options? You can apply for a conditional use permit. There will be a hearing, notice to neighbors, the whole process. Takes about 3 to 6 months, costs around $5,000 in fees, and there is no guarantee it will be approved. She handed me a packet of forms. Or you can cease operations and avoid the fines. I took the packet, feeling sick. $5,000 I did not have, and 6 months of not working would destroy my business. Most of my clients would not wait that long on the drive home. I called my friend Derek, who was a land use attorney in Los Angeles. We had gone to college together, and he owed me a favor from when I had built custom cabinets for his home office at cost. Quincy, my man, Derek answered. What's going on? I explained the situation while sitting in traffic on the 91 freeway. Derek listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Okay, here is the thing, he said when I finished. You could fight this, but it is going to be expensive and time-consuming. The county has the law on their side if you are operating a business in a residentially zoned area. So I am screwed. I did not say that. I said fighting the zoning violation is a losing battle, but if you are interested in a different approach, there might be something else you can do. I'm listening. The HOA development that borders you, Sunset Ridge, right? When was it built? They broke ground about 5 years ago, I think. Most of the houses are only a couple years old. And your property has been there longer. I bought it 12 years ago. The house itself is from the 80s. I heard Derek typing on his keyboard. Okay, here is a thought. Sometimes when developers build new subdivisions, they request zoning changes or amendments to the general plan for the surrounding area to make their development more attractive. Higher-end residential areas want to ensure the neighboring properties maintain a certain character. Which means what for me? Which means it is possible that the zoning for your area was changed sometime in the past decade, and you might have been grandfathered in, or there might have been some shenanigans with how it was done. Let me do some digging. I will call you back. I spent the rest of the drive home feeling a small spark of hope. If there was a legal angle here, Derek would find it. When I got home, there was a new notice stuck to my front door. It was from the Sunset Ridge HOA, informing me that they were formally objecting to any conditional use permit I might apply for, and would be presenting evidence at any hearing about the negative impact my business had on their community. I crumpled the notice and threw it across my living room. Helen Orwell was not just trying to shut me down. She was going to make sure I could not find a way to stay in business. That evening, Marcus and my other assistant, Jenny, came by to talk about what was happening. Jenny had been with me for 2 years and was saving money to start her own furniture design business someday. Marcus was putting himself through community college and needed the income. What are we going to do? Jenny asked, sitting at my kitchen table with a beer I had offered her. I do not know yet, I admitted. I am waiting to hear back from a lawyer friend, but I want you both to start looking for other work just in case. I will give you the best references I can. This is because of that HOA lady, is not it? Marcus said. She has been driving by like 3 times a week taking pictures. Yeah, it is Helen Orwell, I confirmed. She has decided I am her personal project. What is her problem? Jenny asked. You are not even in her HOA. Control, I said simply. Some people cannot stand anything happening around them that they do not have control over. My phone rang. It was Derek. I think I found something, he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. Can you come to my office tomorrow? I want to show you some documents. I drove to Los Angeles the next morning, fighting through the nightmare of Southern California traffic. Derek's office was in Century City, in one of those glass towers that cost more per square foot than my entire house was worth. He had a conference room set up with documents spread across the table and his laptop open to what looked like county planning maps. "Okay, so I went deep into the county records," Derek started, pointing at the maps. "Your property and the area around it was originally zoned RR, rural residential, which allows for agricultural use and small-scale home-based businesses. That zoning had been in place since the 70s. "Right," I said, following along. "Now, 5 years ago, Meridian Development Corporation bought a large parcel of land adjacent to yours to build Sunset Ridge. They wanted to market it as an upscale, planned community. To do that, they petitioned the county to rezone not just their parcel, but a broader area around it, including yours, to a more restrictive residential classification that would prohibit certain uses." My stomach dropped. They rezoned my property without telling me. Well, here is where it gets interesting. They tried to, but according to California law, when a zoning change is proposed, property owners within a certain radius have to be notified and given a chance to object at public hearings. He pulled out a stack of papers. "I pulled the records from those hearings. You should have been sent certified notice. I never got anything like that. That is what I thought, so I checked the mailing records. The notice was sent to an address on your street, but the wrong house number. It looks like a clerical error, but the county marked you as properly noticed because they had a record of mailing something." I felt a surge of anger. So they changed my zoning without actually telling me. Technically, they can argue they followed procedure, but here is the kicker. The zoning change that was approved was supposed to only apply to new developments. Existing properties with established uses were supposed to be grandfathered in. That was part of the deal to get it passed. Derek handed me another document. This is from the Planning Commission meeting. They specifically discussed not wanting to harm existing property owners. Then why is the county trying to shut me down? Because someone, probably your friend Helen, filed a complaint and the county enforcement division did not do their homework. They just saw that your parcel was in a restricted zone and assumed you were in violation. They did not check whether you had grandfathered rights. I looked at the documents, trying to process what this meant. So I can fight the violation, you can, and you should win. But that is going to take time and money. However, I have a different idea. Derek pulled up another map on his laptop. What if instead of just fighting to keep your workshop, you went on a fence? What do you mean? The zoning change that Meridian Development pushed through was not just about your property. They rezoned a whole area, but the way they did it was shady. They used a category of zoning that is actually intended for areas closer to urban centers, not unincorporated county land. And they got variances approved based on representations they made about the development that I am not sure they fully delivered on. Derek zoomed in on the map. If someone were to challenge the underlying zoning change, argue that it was improperly approved, or that the developer did not meet the conditions they promised, the county might have to reconsider the whole thing. And that would affect Sunset Ridge. It could affect the entire area. If the zoning reverts to what it was before, or if it gets changed to something else entirely, yeah, it would affect every property in the zone, including Sunset Ridge. Derek leaned back in his chair. Property values in planned communities like that are based partly on the zoning protections that keep undesirable uses out. If those protections go away, values can drop. I understood what he was suggesting. You are talking about going after their property values. I am talking about correcting an improper zoning change that has harmed you. If that happens to have side effects for the people who caused the problem in the first place, well, that is just how it goes. I thought about Helen Orwell and her smug face, about the way she had weaponized the county government against me, about how she was trying to destroy my livelihood because she did not like looking at my workshop from her backyard. What would I need to do? Derek grinned. We would need to file a petition with the county challenging the zoning change. We would need to document how you were improperly noticed, how the change has harmed you, and how the conditions of the original approval were not met. Then, we would request a hearing before the Planning Commission. How long would that take? Could be a few months. But here is the thing. Once we file the challenge, it creates uncertainty about the zoning. That uncertainty alone can affect property values, especially in a development like Sunset Ridge, where people paid a premium for those zoning protections. And my violation notice. We file an appeal arguing that you have grandfathered rights and were improperly noticed about the zoning change. That should at least pause the enforcement action while it gets sorted out. I looked at the maps and documents spread across the table. This was going to be a fight, and it was going to cost money I did not have much of. But the alternative was losing everything I had built. Let's do it, I said. Derek and I spent the next 2 weeks preparing the challenge. He agreed to work for a reduced rate since we were friends, but I still had to scrape together $10,000 for his retainer and the filing fees. I took out a loan against my truck and asked my parents for help, which hurt my pride but was necessary. The petition we filed was thorough. Derek had found that Meridian Development had promised to build a community park and a bike path as part of their approval conditions. The park existed, but it was much smaller than promised. The bike path was never built at all. They had also promised to maintain certain green space ratios that Derek's research suggested they had not met. More importantly, Derek documented how the notice about the zoning change had been sent to the wrong address, and how I had never been properly informed about something that directly affected my property rights. He argued that the entire zoning change should be invalidated, or, at minimum, my property should be exempted. When we filed the petition with Riverside County, we also filed the appeal of my zoning violation. As Derek predicted, the county paused enforcement while the appeal was being reviewed. I got a small taste of satisfaction when I thought about Helen Orwell finding out that her complaint had not immediately destroyed me. That satisfaction lasted about 3 days, until I got a visit from Helen herself. I was in my workshop, working on a dresser for a client in Pasadena when I heard someone shouting outside. I turned off the saw and walked out to find Helen standing at my property line, her face red with fury. "What do you think you are doing?" she screamed at me. "Working," I said calmly. "Since the enforcement action has been paused. You filed some kind of complaint about our neighborhood. I got a notice from the county about a zoning hearing. I filed a petition challenging a zoning change that was improperly done. If you got noticed, it is because you are an affected property owner." I kept my voice level. "Just like I should have been noticed 5 years ago. You are trying to hurt our property values. Do you have any idea what you are doing? I am trying to save my business that you tried to destroy." I took a step toward her. "You came after me, Helen. You did not try to talk to me. You did not try to find a compromise. You went straight to the county and tried to shut me down. You are running a business in a residential neighborhood. I was running this business before your neighborhood even existed. You moved in next to me and now you are mad that I was here first." Helen pointed a shaking finger at me. "If you go through with this, I will make sure you regret it. I have lawyers. I have resources. I will bury you." "Get off my property," I said quietly. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stalked back toward her development. I went back inside the workshop, but my hands were shaking too much to work safely with the tools. I sat down on my workbench and tried to calm down. I had never been good with confrontation, and having someone scream at me like that had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. That evening, I got a call from Derek. "Hey, so I just got a very angry call from a lawyer representing the Sunset Ridge HOA," he said. "They are threatening to sue you for harassment and tortious interference with property values." Can they do that? They can file a lawsuit, sure. Whether it would go anywhere is another question. You have a legitimate legal challenge to a zoning change that affected you. That is protected activity, but they can make your life miserable with litigation. I felt exhausted. Maybe I should just give up, Derek. Shut down the workshop, find another job. Is that what you want to do? I thought about it. I thought about the furniture I had built, the clients who trusted me, the satisfaction of creating something with my hands. I thought about Marcus and Jenny and how this job had helped them. I thought about Helen Orwell and her entitled rage. "No," I said. "I want to fight." "Then we fight. Let them bring their lawsuit. We will deal with it." The county scheduled a hearing on my petition for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, word spread through Sunset Ridge about what was happening. I started getting nasty looks when I drove past the development. Someone egged my truck one night. Another time, I found nails scattered across the end of my driveway near the road, but I also got some unexpected support. A few residents from Sunset Ridge reached out to me quietly. One guy named Tom, who lived 3 houses down from Helen, came by one evening. "I just want you to know that not all of us support what Helen is doing," he said. He was in his 30s, worked in tech, seemed reasonable. "Most of us did not even know you were here until she started her crusade." "I appreciate that," I said. "She is kind of the worst," Tom continued. "She fined me $300 because my garage door was left open during the day, said it was an eyesore. She has fined at least half the neighborhood for something." "Why did you all elect her HOA president?" Tom laughed bitterly. "We did not. She was appointed by the developer while they still controlled the board. By the time we could have voted her out, she had consolidated enough power and scared enough people that nobody wanted to run against her." "That sounds terrible." "It is. Look, I know your zoning thing might affect our property values, and I am not thrilled about that. But honestly, if it gets rid of Helen and her insane HOA rules, it might be worth it." He shook my hand. "Good luck at the hearing." I did not know if Tom represented a significant portion of Sunset Ridge, or if he was an outlier, but it felt good to know that Helen had not turned absolutely everyone against me. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at the County Administration Building in Riverside. Derek and I arrived early and set up in the hearing room. It was a typical government space, with fluorescent lights and cheap carpet, a raised platform where the planning commissioners would sit, and rows of chairs for the public. Those chairs filled up quickly. Helen had apparently mobilized the entire Sunset Ridge HOA. I counted at least 40 people wearing matching T-shirts that said, "Protect our community" on them. Helen sat in the front row, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who I assumed were her lawyers. The Planning Commission consisted of 5 people, a mix of appointees who volunteered their time to deal with land use issues. They looked like they would rather be anywhere else, which I understood. The chair, a retired engineer named Robert Feldman, called the hearing to order and explained the process. Derek would present my petition, then the county staff would present their analysis, then there would be public comment, then the other side could respond. Derek stood up and laid out the case methodically. He showed how the notice about the zoning change had been sent to the wrong address. He showed the minutes from the original Planning Commission meeting where they had discussed grandfathering existing uses. He presented evidence that Meridian Development had not met several of the conditions they had promised when the zoning change was approved. Mr. Yates has operated his woodworking business for 8 years without a single legitimate complaint until recently, Derek said. He has invested his livelihood in this business based on the legal rights he had under the original zoning. To retroactively strip those rights through a process where he was not properly noticed is fundamentally unfair and likely illegal. The county planning staff presented next. Their position was that the notice had been sent to an address on record, even if it was wrong, and that satisfied the legal requirement. They argued that my business was technically in violation of the current zoning code, regardless of how the zoning got changed. Then it was time for public comment. Helen was the first to the microphone. She had prepared a whole presentation with photos of my workshop, printouts of property value analyses, and testimonials from Sunset Ridge residents. Commissioners, what we have here is a man who is running a commercial industrial operation in the middle of a residential area, she began, her voice dripping with concern. The noise, the traffic, the appearance, it has all had a negative impact on our community. We purchased our homes with the understanding that the area was protected by zoning laws that would preserve the residential character. She went on for the full 3 minutes allowed for public comment, painting me as some kind of polluting factory operator instead of a guy who made furniture. Other Sunset Ridge residents followed. Most of them echoed Helen's talking points. A few admitted they had never actually seen or heard my workshop, but were concerned about property values. One woman claimed that delivery trucks to my shop had nearly hit her dog, which was a complete lie since delivery trucks did not even go near the HOA streets. Then Tom from Sunset Ridge got up to speak. I live in the neighborhood, and I have to say that most of this is overblown, he said. I have driven by Mr. Yates' property many times. It is neat and well maintained. I have never heard excessive noise. This whole thing seems to be more about control than about any actual problem. Helen's head whipped around to glare at Tom. I saw her whisper something to the person next to her. A few more people spoke, a mix of supporters and opponents. Then the commissioners asked questions. Mr. Yates, can you tell us about the nature of your business? One commissioner asked. I stood up nervously. I do custom furniture building, mostly high-end pieces for residential clients. I have 2 part-time employees. We work normal business hours, 9 to 5 on weekdays. We do not have customers coming to the property. Everything is delivered to the clients when it is done. And you have been doing this for 8 years. Yes, madam. I started it as a hobby, and it grew into a business after I was laid off from my previous job in aerospace. I checked the county rules before I started and was told that home-based businesses were allowed in my zoning area. Why did you not apply for a business license? I did not know I needed one. When I checked with the county back then, they told me that because I was in an unincorporated area and it was home-based, I did not need a separate license beyond my contractor's license for the woodworking. Another commissioner jumped in. It seems like there was a good faith misunderstanding here, at least initially. The questioning went on for another 30 minutes. Derek responded to technical questions about the zoning law and the notice requirements. The county staff defended their position, but seemed less certain when pressed about the grandfathering issue. Finally, the commission chair said they would take the matter under advisement and issue a written decision within 30 days. As people filed out of the hearing room, Helen made sure to walk past me. You have not won anything, she hissed. Even if they rule in your favor, I will make sure you never have a moment of peace." I did not respond. There was no point. Over the next month, things escalated in ways I had not anticipated. The Sunset Ridge HOA filed a lawsuit against me in Superior Court, claiming that my zoning challenge was a malicious attempt to harm their property values and constituted intentional interference with economic advantage. It was a garbage lawsuit, according to Derek, but it still required a response and cost me more legal fees. Someone, I assumed from Sunset Ridge, filed a complaint with the state contractors licensing board claiming I was doing unlicensed work. That triggered an investigation that took weeks to resolve and required me to produce all my licenses and documentation. The county building department suddenly decided to inspect my workshop, something they had never done before. They found a few minor violations, like a missing permit for some electrical work I had done years ago, and fined me $2,000. It felt like I was being attacked from all sides. I barely slept. The stress was affecting my work. I snapped at Marcus over something minor and had to apologize. My parents kept calling to make sure I was okay. But then things started to shift. A local news reporter from the Press Enterprise, Riverside's newspaper, got wind of the story and wrote an article about it. The headline was "HOA President's Zoning Complaint Sparks Battle Over Property Rights." The article was surprisingly balanced, laying out both sides but also noting that I had been operating my business for years without issue, until Helen moved in. The article got picked up by some online forums and local news sites. Suddenly, I was getting emails and calls from people supporting me. A few were from other business owners who had dealt with similar HOA issues. One was from a producer for a local TV news station asking if I would do an interview. I talked to Derek about whether I should do media. "It is a risk," he said. "You do not want to say anything that could hurt us legally." But at the same time, public pressure can affect how county officials think about these things. The Planning Commission members are appointed, but they still care about public opinion. I did the TV interview. The reporter was a young woman named Michelle who came out to my property with a cameraman. She filmed my workshop, interviewed me about the situation, and even got a few shots of me working on a piece of furniture. "Why is this business important to you?" she asked during the interview. "It is more than just a job," I said, trying to put my feelings into words. "When I was in aerospace, I was just another number. Here, I create things that last. I build furniture that people will have in their homes for generations. It matters." The segment aired that evening and again the next morning. I got dozens of messages from people who had seen it, offering support. But I also got some nasty messages from Sunset Ridge residents accusing me of trying to destroy their neighborhood for my own profit. Finally, 32 days after the hearing, the Planning Commission's decision came. Derek called me as soon as he got it. "We won," he said simply. I felt my knees go weak. "What exactly did they say?" "They ruled that you were improperly noticed about the zoning change, which violated due process. They are exempting your property from the restrictive zoning, essentially grandfathering you in. You can continue to operate your workshop. What about the broader zoning challenge?" "They are referring that to the Board of Supervisors for review. They agreed that there are questions about whether Meridian Development met all the conditions of their approval. The supervisors will hold hearings about whether to modify or rescind the zoning change." I sat down hard on my couch. "So I can keep working, you can keep working. The violation notice is void. You are in the clear." I thanked Derek, hung up, and just sat there for a while, letting the relief wash over me. Then I called Marcus and Jenny and told them the news. We decided to take the next day off to celebrate. That evening I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Yates." It was a man's voice, professional. "My name is Richard Chen. I am an attorney representing Meridian Development Corporation." My stomach tightened. "Okay. I understand that the Planning Commission has ruled in your favor on the grandfather issue. Congratulations on that. However, we are very concerned about the broader zoning review that has been triggered. My clients invested significant resources in the Sunset Ridge development based on the zoning protections that are now being questioned. Your clients also failed to properly notice property owners and did not meet the conditions of their approval," I said. "That is not my fault. Mr. Yates, I am calling to see if we might reach some kind of agreement. Meridian is prepared to offer you compensation in exchange for withdrawing the broader zoning challenge." "How much compensation?" "We could start negotiations at $50,000. It was a lot of money. More than I made in a year. But I thought about Helen Orwell and how she had tried to destroy me without a second thought. "I am not interested," I said. "Mr. Yates, please consider this carefully. The litigation could drag on for years. Legal fees will mount. And there is no guarantee you will win at the supervisor level. I already won what I needed to win. The rest is just about making sure this does not happen to someone else. Tell your clients they should have built the bike path they promised." I hung up before he could respond. The next few months were a whirlwind. The Board of Supervisors scheduled a series of hearings about the Sunset Ridge zoning. Derek and I prepared extensive evidence about the broken promises and improper procedures. Meridian Development hired a team of lawyers and consultants to defend the original zoning change. The hearings were contentious. Helen and the Sunset Ridge HOA showed up in force each time, arguing that changing the zoning would be unfair to homeowners who had bought in good faith. Meridian Development argued that they had substantially complied with the approval conditions and that any minor deviations were not material. Derek countered that the law required full compliance, not substantial compliance, and that property owners like me had been denied due process. News coverage of the hearings focused on the David versus Goliath angle, a small business owner taking on a major developer and a wealthy HOA. I did not love being in the spotlight, but it seemed to help our case. During one hearing, Tom from Sunset Ridge testified in support of the zoning review. "I think we need to acknowledge that the HOA has become overly restrictive and that the original zoning change was sold to us as residents with promises that were not kept," he said. "If the county needs to revisit this to make it right, then that is what should happen." Helen looked like she wanted to explode. After the third hearing, the Board of Supervisors deliberated in closed session for 2 hours. When they came back, the chair, a woman named Patricia Gomez who represented our district, announced their decision. "After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, this board finds that Meridian Development Corporation did not fully comply with the conditions of approval for the zoning change approved 5 years ago. Specifically, the required bike path was never constructed, and the green space ratios were not maintained. Additionally, we find that the notice procedures for the original zoning change were inadequate, with at least one affected property owner not being properly notified." She paused and looked at the packed hearing room. "Therefore, the board is rescinding the zoning change for the affected area and reverting to the previous RR rural residential designation. Property owners in Sunset Ridge who made improvements or built in good faith reliance on the previous zoning will be grandfathered in, but the restrictions on neighboring properties that were imposed by the change are removed." The room erupted. Helen was shouting something I could not make out. Tom was actually smiling. The Meridian lawyers were already on their phones. Derek leaned over to me. We won. We actually won. The practical effect of the decision was that the area around Sunset Ridge, including my property, went back to the looser zoning rules that had existed before. I could continue my workshop without any question. But more importantly, Sunset Ridge lost the zoning protections that had made it an exclusive, restricted community. Theoretically, someone could now open other home-based businesses near Sunset Ridge. The county could approve uses that would have been prohibited under the old zoning. The whole character that the development had been marketed on was gone. Property values in Sunset Ridge started to drop almost immediately. Real estate agents started lowering asking prices. A few houses that had been on the market went into price reductions. Online real estate sites showed a trending downward value estimate for the neighborhood. I wish I could say I felt bad about it, but I did not. These were the same people who had worn matching T-shirts to try to shut down my livelihood. Helen had weaponized the government against me, and now she was dealing with the consequences. A week after the supervisor's decision, I was working in my workshop when I heard a car pull up. I looked out to see a for sale sign being installed in Helen's front yard. She was leaving. I felt a satisfaction that was probably not entirely healthy, but I allowed myself to enjoy it anyway. Tom stopped by a few days later. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for tanking your property value." I asked with a slight smile. He laughed. "Yeah, well, that part is not great. We will probably lose 20 or 30,000 in equity, but Helen resigned as HOA president. Actually, she resigned from the board entirely, and the new board has already started rolling back a lot of her insane rules. We can leave our garage doors open now." "Can you imagine?" "Revolutionary," I said. "My point is, you stood up to a bully and it cost you a lot, but it was worth it. At least some of us appreciate that." After Tom left, I went back to work on a dining table I was building for a client in San Diego. Marcus and Jenny were both there, and we fell into the comfortable rhythm of working together. The lawsuit that the HOA had filed against me was quietly dropped a few weeks later. Helen's replacement as HOA president, a reasonable guy named Steve, called me to apologize for the whole situation. "We are not all like her," he said. "I hope you know that." "I am starting to," I replied. My business actually grew after all the publicity. People who had seen the news stories reached out asking about custom furniture. I got inquiries from as far away as San Francisco and San Diego. I had to hire another part-time worker to keep up with demand. 6 months after the Board of Supervisors' decision, I was featured in a woodworking magazine article about artisan furniture makers in Southern California. They took photos of my workshop and some of my pieces. It was good exposure and brought in even more business. One afternoon, I was delivering a finished bookcase to a client in Corona when I drove past the Sunset Ridge development. Helen's house had sold. The new owners were a young family with kids. I saw them in the yard playing, and the garage door was open. The for sale signs that had popped up around the neighborhood after the zoning decision had mostly come down. Property values had stabilized at a lower level but were not in free fall. People were living their lives. I thought about how all of this had started with Helen's complaint to the zoning department. How she could have just talked to me, worked something out, been a neighbor instead of an enforcer. But that was not who she was. Some people go through life needing to control everything around them, needing to impose their vision of how things should be on everyone else. Helen was one of those people, and when she ran into someone who pushed back, her whole world fell apart. I drove home to my property, pulled into my driveway, and looked at my workshop. It was not much to look at from the outside, just a converted garage with some lumber stacked nearby. But inside was my livelihood, my passion, my purpose. Helen had tried to take that away from me, and in the process, she had destroyed herself. I got out of my truck and walked into the workshop. Marcus was there, working on a cherry wood chair. "How did the delivery go?" he asked. "Good. Client loved it. Already wants to order a matching desk." "Nice. We are going to need more cherry. I will order some tomorrow." I picked up a piece of sandpaper and started working on a table leg that needed smoothing. The familiar motion was calming. This was what I was meant to do: create things, build things, make something useful and beautiful out of raw materials. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverside County. The HOA that had tried to destroy me was defanged. The property values of people who had supported that effort had taken a hit. And I was still here, still working, still building. It was not a perfect ending. I was still paying off the legal bills. The stress of the whole ordeal had taken years off my life. Some relationships with neighbors were permanently damaged, but I had won. I had stood up to someone who thought they could use their power to crush me, and I had not only survived but thrived. The workshop smelled of sawdust and wood stain. Marcus had music playing low on his phone. Outside, I could hear birds settling in for the evening. This was my place, my business, my life, and nobody was going to take it away from me. A year after everything settled, I got an unexpected piece of mail. It was a wedding invitation from Tom and his fiancée, who apparently lived a few houses down from him in Sunset Ridge. They had met at an HOA meeting where they had both voted to remove Helen from the board. I laughed at the irony. Helen's tyrannical HOA presidency had actually brought people together, just not in the way she had intended. I RSVP'd yes, and even built them a custom jewelry box as a wedding gift. At the wedding, which was held at a winery in Temecula, several other Sunset Ridge residents came up to talk to me. Most were friendly. A few admitted they had been wrong to support Helen's crusade against me. One older woman named Dorothy pulled me aside. "I want you to know that I voted against everything Helen proposed regarding you," she said. "I am a retired small business owner myself. I knew what she was trying to do was wrong." "I appreciate that," I said. She was a terror to everyone. My grandson came to visit for a week last summer, and she tried to find me because his car was parked in my driveway, and she said it was an eyesore. A car in a driveway. That is what we were dealing with. I heard versions of this story all night. Helen had fined people for having the wrong color welcome mat. She had tried to ban children from playing in their own front yards because of noise. She had sent violation notices to people who planted the wrong type of flowers. Her departure had been a relief to almost everyone. Steve, the new HOA president, gave a toast at the wedding. "To Tom and Jennifer," he said, raising his glass. "And to new beginnings. For them and for our neighborhood." People cheered. I drove home that night feeling something I had not felt in a long time: contentment. The whole ordeal with Helen and the zoning had been terrible while it was happening, but it had led to good things. My business was stronger. The neighborhood was healthier. I had proven to myself that I could fight back when necessary. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was Derek. "Hey, I wanted to give you some news," he said. "Remember that lawyer from Meridian Development who tried to pay you off?" "Yeah. Turns out Meridian is facing a class action lawsuit from Sunset Ridge homeowners claiming fraud in the original sale of the properties. The homeowners are arguing that Meridian promised amenities and zoning protections that they did not deliver or maintain. Are they going to win? Hard to say. But it is going to cost Meridian a fortune to defend, and their reputation is taking a hit. They are having trouble getting financing for new projects." "Good," I said simply. After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a moment, looking at my house and workshop. The exterior lights were on, casting a warm glow across the property. I thought about karma, about consequences, about how trying to hurt someone else often ends up hurting yourself more. Helen had moved to Corona with dreams of running a perfect little kingdom through her HOA. She had seen me as a threat to that vision and had tried to eliminate me. But her overreach had brought down not just herself, but the entire structure she had been trying to protect. Meridian Development had cut corners and broken promises to maximize their profit. And now, they were facing legal consequences that would cost them far more than it would have to just build the bike path and maintain the green space they had promised. The Sunset Ridge homeowners who had blindly followed Helen's crusade had seen their property values drop because they had not bothered to question whether her war against me was justified. Actions have consequences. That was the lesson of the whole thing. I got out of my truck and walked into my house. It was late, but I was not tired. I made some coffee and sat on my back porch, looking out at the lights of Corona in the distance. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a potential client in Laguna Beach asking about a custom entertainment center. I smiled and started typing a response. Business was good, life was good, and Helen Orwell was someone else's problem now, wherever she had moved to. I almost felt sorry for her new neighbors, almost. The next morning, I was in the workshop early, working on a rocking chair for a client's nursery. It was detailed work, requiring precision and patience. The kind of work that made me forget about everything else and just focus on the wood and the tools and the craft. Marcus came in around 9. "Morning, boss. You are here early." Could not sleep. Decided to get a head start on this project. He looked at the rocking chair taking shape on my bench. "That is beautiful work." "Thanks. It is for a first-time mom in Irvine. She wants something that will last generations." "That is what you do best." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of tools and machines creating a familiar soundtrack. This was what Helen had tried to take away. Not just my income, but this feeling of purpose and accomplishment. The satisfaction of creating something meaningful. She had failed. And I was still here, still building, still creating. That evening, I got a call from a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. They were doing a larger story about HOA overreach in Southern California and wanted to include my story. I agreed to an interview. The article came out 2 weeks later. It was a long feature piece that included my situation along with several other examples of HOAs abusing their power. There was a woman in Orange County who had been fined thousands of dollars for having a vegetable garden in her front yard. A veteran in San Diego who had been told he could not fly an American flag. A family in Riverside who had been foreclosed on because they could not afford the HOA's special assessment fees. The article struck a nerve. It was shared thousands of times on social media. State legislators started talking about HOA reform. One assembly member from San Diego announced she was drafting legislation to limit HOA powers and increase oversight. I got calls from people all over California sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were worse than mine. It was clear that Helen Orwell was not an anomaly. She was a symptom of a larger problem with how HOAs operated in the state. I did not set out to become some kind of activist, but I found myself speaking at a legislative hearing in Sacramento about the need for HOA reform. I talked about my experience and how the lack of oversight allowed people like Helen to abuse their power. HOAs serve a purpose, I told the committee, but they need accountability, they need transparency. And homeowners need realistic ways to challenge unfair decisions, without having to hire lawyers they cannot afford. The legislation that eventually passed included provisions requiring HOAs to provide detailed justifications for fines, creating an ombudsman office to handle complaints, and making it easier for homeowners to remove abusive board members. It was not perfect, but it was progress. And it all started because Helen Orwell had called zoning on my workshop, thinking she could crush me, and instead had set off a chain of events that led to real change. 2 years after the zoning battle ended, I expanded my workshop, adding another building on my property specifically for finishing work. The county approved the permits without any issues. Marcus had graduated from community college and was working for me full-time, learning advanced woodworking techniques. Jenny had left to start her own design business, and we collaborated on projects regularly. I had hired 2 more assistants and was considering hiring another. My little workshop had become a real business, profitable and growing. Sunset Ridge had settled into its new reality. Property values had stabilized at about 15% below their peak. Some people had left, but new families had moved in. The HOA had transformed into a reasonable organization that maintained common areas and organized community events, but did not terrorize residents. Tom sent me a photo of his new baby, sitting in the rocking chair I had built for them. "She loves it," his text said. "Thank you for everything." I printed the photo and hung it in my workshop, a reminder of why I did this work. One Saturday afternoon, I was at a lumber yard in Ontario, selecting wood for a new project, when I ran into someone I had not seen in a while. It was Richard Chen, the Meridian development lawyer who had tried to pay me off. He recognized me immediately. "Mr. Yates," he said, extending his hand. "How are you?" I shook his hand. "Doing well, you cannot complain." "Well, I could, but it would not help." He smiled ruefully. "I wanted to tell you that I respect what you did. It cost my client a lot of money, but you were right. They cut corners and it caught up with them. I appreciate you saying that." Meridian ended up settling the class action for $8 million. They also had to build the bike path they originally promised, which cost another $2 million. The CEO resigned. It was a whole thing. I read about some of that. The new leadership is trying to do things the right way. They actually hired me to review all their old projects and make sure they are in compliance with their approval conditions. I have been finding a lot of issues. He shook his head. Your case was a wake-up call for the industry. Glad something good came from it. We talked for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. Driving home with a truck full of walnut and maple, I thought about how strange life was. The battle that had nearly destroyed me had ended up being the best thing that ever happened to my business. The woman who had tried to crush me had ended up hurting herself and everyone around her instead. And a major developer had changed its practices because one stubborn furniture maker had refused to back down. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my property. The house I had bought 12 years ago, the workshop that had saved me after my layoff, the new finishing building that represented growth and success. This was home. This was my life's work, and I had fought to keep it. My phone rang. Another potential client, this time from Santa Barbara, asking about a custom dining set. I answered with a smile. "Yates Custom Woodworking. How can I help you?" Business was very good indeed.